Hello everybody, welcome to video number 25 of my Richard Laymon horror novel review series. Today I'm talking about One Rainy Night from 1991. Here's the cover art. It's an unusual design because the image covers most of the book. His name is relatively small. And this is one of the very first cover arts I ever saw in a Richard Laymon novel. Of all things, where I first saw this was an advertisement for a book club on the back of the women's magazines that my mum used to subscribe to in the early 90s. There were 3 Richard Laymon novels printed on the advertisement. This one, The Stake and Funland. So I guess I must have been about 12, 13, something like that when I first saw them. I guess thus began my love for Richard Laymon. The spine, 410 pages, and here is the back, which says, "The water drops like a shroud on the town of Bixby. Warm, viscous, and unnatural, it coats the inhabitants in an unending torrent and turns them into crazy, hate-filled maniacs. A helpful stranger at a gas station shoves a petrol pump down a customer's throat and squeezes the trigger. A soaking wet queue of cinema-goers smashes its way inside the movie house to slice up the dry people within. A loving wife attacks her husband, bouncing the back of his head on the marble floor until it sounds like sloppy wet meat." ... Yeah, you see there, the back doesn't attempt to give you some real idea of what's going on in the book. It prepares you for the fact that this is just a lot of violence in this book. That whole litany there of violent actions, that's covered in like a 3-page or 5-page span of text. There's a lot more than that. But all right, well, yeah, One Rainy Night, a.k.a. Richard Laymon Gets Political. This is the closest Laymon would ever come to some kind of social commentary. The novel begins where there's been a murder, a horrendous murder, where this young black boy has been, has been tied to the goalpost of a football field by some racist thugs, tortured and set on fire, burnt alive. And just shortly after that, I think the night after that, a black rain falls upon this town. It's a very warm rain, and when it coats people, when it gets on people, it turns them into maniacs who want to murder the first people they see, sometimes cannibalize them, sometimes drink their blood, but always do horrendous things to them. And it's a fantastic premise. I mean, it's such a cool idea. Simple, but very, very cool. And for 1991, I was a child of the early 90s, and I remember how prevalent, looking back now, it didn't seem that way at the time, but looking back, how prevalent racism was where I grew up in the north of England. And I think it's cool that Richard Laymon took this on, because he's not a writer known for taking on issues and themes. He never aspired to be that kind of thing. I do think he was a very intelligent man. I do think he was a very clever person. At the very least, he was a highly educated person. But he never really wanted to be that kind of horror writer. He just wanted to tell stories that he wanted to tell. And like I said, this is the only book where it has a kind of a metaphor going on or a subtext going on. The effects and the stupidity of bigotry and hatred. Possibly a different kind of horror writer could have written an excellent 400-page novel based on that premise. This isn't an excellent novel. I think that this could have been, in Richard Laymon's hands, the most this could have been is a classic short story or maybe a 100-page novella. But for this thing to really be great, you have to have an interest in characterization, and you have to sustain interest with something other than violence. So Laymon devised the action of this book into 4 groups of characters. We've got a pizza delivery woman called Maureen, who falls in with these hoodlums who have killed the black boy. We've got Maureen's love interest, Trevor, who's a cop, and he's holed up in the police station with a mother and daughter who've come to report what they know about that murder. We've got a little 9-year-old girl called Cara and her babysitter and her babysitter's boyfriend. They're stuck at home while the storm is going on. And then we have Cara's parents, John and Lynn, who are in a restaurant when the storm happens. So all these characters are connected in some way to each other. And Laymon paces it quite well. He breaks up the action, so we're not always stuck with one group. Because really, there's not a lot going on. It is just these 4 groups of characters are stuck somewhere, trying to understand what this rain is and why it's doing what it's doing. And they're all trying to, in some way, get away from their situations. John and Lynn obviously want to get home to their daughter Cara. Trevor wants to find Maureen his love interest. So in terms of action, there's a reason why the back of this book just kind of describes violent actions. It's because there's not much else to describe if we're going to talk about plot. It's not a plot-driven novel. It's a splatterpunk book. It's a gore book. There's enormous amounts of violence going on here. And after a while, for me, I'll be honest, it did get a little bit tedious. I liked very much the resolution of the novel. I liked the explanation of why the rain is happening and who's doing it and how he's doing it. Even if in some way it does end up promulgating racial stereotypes about black people and voodooism and black magic. But that aside, I thought that as a narrative, it was a great idea. And oh yeah, the other thing that I just want to mention, the characterization of this isn't great. My favorite character in the book is the 9-year-old girl, Kara. She's delightful, but she's also another example of a common Richard Laymon character, which is children, or usually young girls, who speak like no young girls have ever spoken. Like their syntax, their diction, their lexicary is like so far beyond what any kid has ever spoken. Kara is speaking at a higher level than any of the adults in the book, and I'm used to it because I'm a Laymon fan, but it is a little bit distracting. And the most annoying character was the guy who, when he was first introduced, I thought he was going to be the best one. It's John, Kara's father. He's a painter, and he's presented as, he's also a Vietnam veteran, and he's presented as being a cool, intelligent, modest guy. A middle-aged family man who deeply loves his wife and his child. And I thought, oh my God, we are actually going to get a well-rounded middle-aged man from Richard Laymon. But lo and behold, we get to page 91 and they're in this restaurant and the crazy maniacs have burst in. One of the women who works at the restaurant has just been beaten to a pulp, maybe critically, maybe mortally injured. And a doctor arrives on scene, and the doctor, in order to help this injured woman, he cuts open her shirt. And John, our middle-aged hero and father, it says, John watched her breasts jiggle as she twitched. They were small and firm. The creamy skin just above her nipples was seamed with indentations left by the tight garment. Her nipples were erect. John felt heat spreading through his groin. For God's sake, Richard Laymon, can you not for once just give us a male character that does not have this unhealthy monomaniacal obsession with breasts and nipples? It's really, really tiresome, especially if you, like me, you've just spent, and I don't recommend doing what I've just done, but if you've just spent the last 4 months reading nothing except Richard Laymon books, it starts to warp your mind. It honestly does. What on earth was this fixation he had with breasts and nipples? I will never understand it. It's a question for psychoanalysts, I guess, but and that's just one example of dozens in this book of breasts and nipple. Oh, my cat's arrived. Hello. Breasts and nipple fixation. So, yep, the characterization was not great, I have to say. And it kind of had to be in order for this to be a great book, because like I said, there's not much plot going on. But having said all that, I can't say that I disliked this novel. It was fairly well paced. Some of the action was good. It resolves itself well, if abruptly. The ending, like a lot of Richard Laymon's books, it just kind of comes in a flash. After all the build-up, he ties it all up in something like 5 pages, and we don't really learn the fates of anyone involved. But yeah, it's not a great Richard Laymon book, but it's by no means a bad one. It's worth a read, especially if you're into splatterpunk gore novels. Definitely worth a read for that. It's similar to the book Endless Night, if you've ever read that one. I haven't reviewed it yet, but spoiler alert, it's another book which just involves massive amounts of violence and awful people doing awful things to each other. Best thing about the book is the premise, like I said. I think it's a superb premise. I just don't think it's something that a writer like Richard Laymon had it in him to stretch out to 400 pages. Sorry. All right, anyway, guys, I'm going to wrap this up. So thank you for watching this. If you did watch it, One Rainy Night from 1991. I will be back soon with video number 26. Until then, take care of yourselves, and bye for now.